This video is about mystical activism and why I believe it's critical in this climate crisis that we fall in love with creation again. My name is John Robinson. I'm a clinical psychologist with a second doctorate in ministry, an ordained interfaith minister, and a writer, but mostly I'm a mystic. I always have been. I was born a mystic, and I've been writing about conscious aging as a mystical experience for over a decade, but more recently I've come to see that the mystical awareness of life is now critical to our survival in this climate apocalypse. Deeply troubled by this accelerating crisis, I wrote the book Mystical Activism, Transforming a World in Crisis, forwarded by Matthew Fox. It comes out in February and explains this vision. And it's more than this. With 3 adult children and 7 grandchildren, climate change is not just an academic topic for me. I'm scared for their future, and I'm sure that you are as well for your loved ones, and I'm also scared for the human family and for life itself. Let me get started with an introduction. I've been gathering climate change articles for the past several years, and my deep dive into this fast-moving literature has recently become extremely disturbing. As a result, this is the most difficult and perhaps the most important talk I've ever given. Indeed, this is my 5th or 6th revision of it because it is that important to me. A sustainability leadership professor from the University of Cumbria in England, Jem Bendell, tells us that at the current pace of runaway global warming, we can no longer assume that humans will figure out a way to avert environmental and societal collapse within the next 10 years. Bendell writes, "The evidence is mounting that the impacts will be catastrophic to our livelihoods and the societies that we live within. And when I say starvation, destruction, migration, disease, and war, I mean in your own life." While some have argued that Bendell's words are extreme or irresponsible, few disagree with the severity, pace, and consequences of global warming. And our growing horror has led to a condition variously known as climate despair, climate anxiety, climate grief, the fear that we're all going to die from this ecological nightmare. And I think many of us know exactly what this syndrome feels like. Even more alarming, the first responders of this environmental 9/11, the climate scientists themselves, are experiencing debilitating levels of shock, anger, grief, depression, despair over their own findings and those of the scientific community at large. Scientists are truly the canaries in this environmental coal mine. So what do we do? How do we respond? What can we do? In this crisis, we are all novices, experts, seekers, and activists, and we all have something to offer. For my part, I want to describe the importance of our inborn mystical nature and its potential for responding meaningfully to the Earth crisis and awaken mystical consciousness in each of us to guide and sustain our lives in this time of climate activism. This is not about being heroic, and it's not about being woo-woo. It's about being deeply grounded in who and where we really are and why we are here at this time in history. So let's start with the emerging voices of mystical activism. Matthew Fox and creation spirituality have always been deeply rooted in the mystical experience of creation, what he calls the via positiva, and our transformation from mystics who experienced the world as sacred to prophets who defend it as holy ground. Fox now brings his mystical themes to the immense crisis of climate change, and he tells us an absence of the sense of the sacred is the basic flaw in many of our efforts at ecologically and environmentally adjusting our human presence to the natural world. And he adds, more than ever, we need to stop and sit and be present to the via positiva, to allow our love for the world and the world's love for us to be deeply felt. This can carry us beyond nationhood and ethnic or racial or religious smallness into a much bigger world of creation itself. Love will be the source of our energy and of our imaginations that will render us effective agents for deeper change, not superficial change, but a change that begins and ends with the reverence and gratitude we carry in our hearts toward the universe that has birthed us. With this kind of deeper perspective, our prophetic callings stand a better chance of effective results. This is a beautiful description and introduction to mystical activism. But Fox is not alone in his call to this kind of sacred awareness. Joanna Macy, longtime Earth activist and climate prophet, tells us, while the truth that we are headed toward extinction is a terrible shock, it has the potential to quicken our collective awakening, powering a profound transformation of our world. This transformation begins within. And now listen carefully to how her next words become so profoundly mystical. She says, we need to know ourselves, not only as individuals, but as co-creators within a deeply ensouled web of life where all is conscious. Once we align with the reality and depth intelligence of consciousness itself, we connect with a spiritual and moral power that gifts intuitive wisdom, guidance, and courage. In essence, we are awakening into the profound intimacy of all things, where we directly know that all beings, nature, the earth, and the cosmos are part of ourselves. Well, this too is mystical activism, an awareness of the deep unity and intrinsic intelligence of conscious being. Another eloquent voice of mystical activism is Crystal Parks, a longtime peace activist and mystic, who writes, mystical activism is intoxicated with life in humble harmony with nature and empowered by the creative energy of the galaxies. It's motivated by adoration and love to act on behalf of all beings. And then she adds, a new kind of human being is required, one that consents to being a partner in an evolutionary leap beyond our wildest imagination, a leap beyond war and violence. This challenging task beckoning to us requires a profound healing and transformation at the deepest core of ourselves and our social structures and institutions. To me, it is absolutely clear that we must now take this leap. And lastly, we turn to cultural historian Thomas Berry, a profound and visionary thinker on ecological spirituality, the universe story, and by implication, mystical activism. And he writes, perhaps a new revelatory experience is taking place, an experience wherein human consciousness awakens to the grandeur and sacred quality of the earth process. Humanity has seldom participated in such a vision since shamanic times, but in such a renewal lies our hope for the future, for ourselves, and for the climate and for the planet on which we live. Berry's words are prophetic, elegant, and a sublime description of the essence of mystical activism. So what then is mystical activism? Well, let me define what I mean by this term. The word mysticism, which is where we start, simply refers to the first-hand experience of the divine, and it's not weird and it's not far out. We've all had big or little mystical experiences, like the stunned amazement of meeting our newborn child for the first time, or standing in silent awe, gazing up at ancient redwoods, or feeling the palpable holiness of a sacred place, or simply being deeply present at the passing of a loved one. In these moments, the mind stops its chatter, perception heightens, and we subtly experience the sacred presence that pervades creation. It's a breakthrough of the divine into personal awareness. Now, mystical consciousness arises from the same awakened, thought-free, sacred awareness, only now we learn to experience it intentionally. In its fullness, mystical consciousness unveils the exquisitely beautiful, infinitely precious, and timeless reality known as creation. Permeated by the divine, everything is perceived as sacred, including us, for the beloved has become the world and everything in it. This awakening of perception leads naturally to mystical activism, for now we act from a conscious unity with creation and instinctively strive to protect her. In the process, we experience the kind of world we want to live in. This is mysticism in action. Failing to see the sacred nature of reality, on the other hand, we go on desecrating creation, exploiting her as a endless supply of raw materials or a cash cow of new consumer products or a garbage dump for toxic waste and discarded packaging. Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist and religious scholar, implicitly describes mystical activism in this way. He says, "This is Eden. This, everywhere around us, is Eden." He says, "When you see the kingdom spread out upon the earth, the old way of living in the world is annihilated." That's the end of the world. The end of the world is not an event to come. It is an event of psychological transformation, of visionary transformation. You see not a world of solid things, but a world of radiance. Mystical activism involves the same transfiguring perception of reality, revealing a pristine, love-filled, immensely beautiful, and immanently conscious place called creation. Awakening this paradigm-shifting power of sacred perception, we find Eden once again, becoming mystics in our transformed perception and prophets in our defense of the sacred. This transformation can provide the source, energy, courage, and ultimate meaning of our work to save the world. So, how do we begin? How do we awaken our mystical activism? In my writing, I have presented numerous exercises on mystical experiences of heaven on earth and the divine world around us that culminate in mystical activism. But here's one simple one that we might just call falling in love with creation again. It is based on the realization that nature makes us mystics, and mystics always return to nature for healing, transformed perception, inspiration, and courage, because it's a return to our divine home. The exercise focuses on 2 short poems that reflect the mystical perception of the world as original blessing. Listen carefully and let them awaken a memory of your own mystical experience of creation. The first one is by Gary Snyder, and it goes like this. He says, to be alive on a mid-September morn, fording a stream, barefoot, pants rolled up, holding boots, pack on, sunshine, ice in the shallows, northern Rockies, rustle and shimmer of icy creek waters. Stones turn underfoot, small and hard on toes, cold nose dripping, singing inside, creek music, heart music, smell of sun on gravel. I pledge allegiance to the soil of Turtle Island, one ecosystem in diversity, under sun, with joyful interpenetration for all. So do you see how the poet moves from mystic to prophet in this piece, from the mystical celebration of the sensory world to a pledge of allegiance to her very existence? This next poem confirms this mystical commitment. It's by Wilfred Pelletier and Ted Poole, and it goes like this. Wherever you are is home, and the earth is paradise. Wherever you set your feet is holy land. You don't live off it like a parasite, you live in it, and it in you, or you don't survive, and that is the only worship of God there is. Now, take a moment to remember. This is the part of the exercise that brings you in. Take a moment to remember when you felt this kind of sensory connection with creation, a time when nothing mattered but wonder, beauty, the present moment, and awakened perception. When the video is over, take a moment to write about your experience of creation and the deepest feelings you experience. Let that memory fill you and bring you back into that experience once again. And what I want you to understand is that the world offers you this kind of awakened perception every single day. It's why we are fighting to save the earth. Now, I want to close this talk with some simple words and a prayer. From Joanna Macy, she says this: "This is the most exquisite moment on earth. We all need to fall in love again with what is. Is anything sweeter than being with the mother in her suffering?" And here's a poem from mystical activists. And it's more than a poem, it's actually a prayer. And the prayer goes like this: "Divine consciousness of life, earth and cosmos, God of all names and none, holy presence dwelling in every creature, we come to you on our knees, in guilt and shame, in sorrow and dread, admitting horrific crimes against creation. Listening to earth's dying cries, we acknowledge our sins of arrogance, apathy, selfishness, plunder, and rape. Our stewardship of creation has been a tragic joke. In failure and profound remorse, we humbly seek forgiveness and guidance. We have completely lost our way and stand to lose so much more. We know you, Divine One. We share your being and consciousness. We are you when we cease pretending to be someone else, someone separate and superior, someone in charge. In abject surrender, in ego-shattering fear and grief, in naked helplessness, we seek the only path home. We return to you. As the fires and storms of human foolishness consume our grandiosity and our world, we ask you to receive us, Divine One. Help us to return to creation. Born of earth, we can live nowhere else. We are the latest blossom of your enchantingly beautiful, infinitely mysterious, love-drenched creativity, the 14 billion-year evolution of yourself. And our home is here. Can a fish live out of water? Can a bird fly with no air? Can humans survive the cold, toxic radiation of space? Desperate plans, false solutions, more foolishness. But what can we do, Divine One? What do you need from us, even as we ask? Words burst from sacred consciousness. Be still. Be silent. Stop talking. Turn off TV and cell phone. Go outside. Open wide your eyes. I shine before you as creation, vibrant, colorful, alive, the symphony of your life and destiny. Look intensely. Look without thought. Open your senses. The seasons of earth, power of wind, greenness of plant, wetness of rain, warmth of sun, smell of soil, abundance of life, chatter of bird and squirrel, busyness of ant and worm, darkness of night, love making everywhere, all rising in the holiness of creation. Let the one you were born to be take you home. Creation will heal you. Then your tenderness, joy, and adoration will heal creation. May the earth bless and keep us. May truth lead the way. May the ancestors see our efforts, and may peace finally stay. May the heart inform our journey. May creation bring us home. May our lives be deeply planted, and may we know we're not alone. Thank you. You can learn more about my work at www.johnrobinson.org.